Good morning, brave heroes, and welcome home. I'm Ash. This is AshQuest, and it's time for the first official podcast, rebranded podcast. This time I'm going to call it what it should have obviously always been called, and that is BWODECAST. The BWODECAST. I'm not quite sure if it should be BWODECAST or the BWODECAST. As such, this is going to be a very graphically minimalistic, just audio only. In fact, I've got my webcam shut off today. And is best listened to on your way to or from work, or while you're painting miniatures. What other activities do you enjoy doing while listening to podcasts? Sometimes I can listen to them while I'm at work. If I'm fortunate enough to be near a PC and I've got the right equipment near me, I do a lot of different things at work. I wear a lot of hats sometimes, so this isn't always the case. But it would be interesting to know, what are you doing right now? What are you up to? What are you getting accomplished? What are you multitasking? Interested to know. Interested? Sound off, please. And I'll even include your example in the intro of my next podcast. So it's the BWODECAST. So that name is based on a bit of a inside joke. It's all in good fun. We're not being exclusionary here. We're not making fun of anybody. But there was a kid, old HeroQuest commercial for the board game, the UK version of it specifically. It was shot once. It was dubbed, I think, for the UK or the US version. They used the exact same commercial, but they dubbed over it using like American kid voices so that you wouldn't detect the British accent. So the kids talking in the American HeroQuest commercial, it's not the kids that they're actually showing. But the British kid lays down his card, his broadsword card, and he says, "Oh, use my broadsword." To which the correct, proper, and only response is to have the opponent player lay down his card and say, "Fire of Wrath." I don't know. In a stroke of genius, I decided BWODECAST. I don't know if it should be BWODECAST or the BWODECAST. You guys help me with that. This is the first iteration of it. I'm going to go back and rename all of the other ones. So this will probably be like episode 3 or something. But it's really the first one. So you're a part of history right now. We're making history together. I have 2 things to talk about today, both HeroQuest related, but you can apply these situations to any dungeon crawler or any game of your choice. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on these. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was on the Old Inn. I just crawled the Old Inn Facebook page. That's where I saw this post. And I wanted to talk about it. I don't want to point anybody out or name names or say that anybody was wrong, anything like that. It's just an observation. The post in question that I'm looking for and I can't find had to do with a father who would, and if you're the author of this post, by all means, out yourself, sound off below. But, if you're not, please don't out the person without their permission or what have you. The subject matter of the post was more or less, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me and I can't remember it word for word. My kids are complaining because my homebrewed version of HeroQuest is too hard and I keep killing their heroes. Any tips on what to do? I read this while I was at work. And I cracked up. I thought about it throughout the day, and I cracked up every time I thought about it. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. No ill will intended here. It is just funny out of the gate. So, the crux of the problem is the difficulty of the game is too high because of modifications made. And, what are some tips you guys have to make it easier now that I've made the game too hard with my modifications? This is funny in general, but like some of the responses were hilarious. My own terrible responses. Tell the kids to get good. Get stronger kids. Tell the kids that you're just training them to be better Zargons, and then double the amount of monsters. Make it even harder and say, now you know what hard feels like. No, in all seriousness, a lot of the responses were actually trying to be helpful. A lot of them were just as baffled as I was, really, because it is a pretty baffling issue to have. It's like, you modified it. It's too hard. What are some tips? Just don't modify. Just dial it back. There has to be more context to it than that, though. Like, we got to give this guy some benefit of the doubt. Did he modify it because it was too easy first? Is he leaving out crucial information here? As to difficulty, I don't think HeroQuest is a difficult game at all. I think that there are moments where the heroes, your party, your specific composition learns, oh, it's pretty fundamental that we don't split up, or at least, kind of stay close. Or it's pretty fundamental that we don't have the wizard go and lead the party and open doors and move into the middle of the room of monsters. And there's lots of fun to be had when you don't do those things, especially when you don't do those things. It's not as if you're following a meta necessarily. You have a lot of freedom of choice in your game. You have a lot of movement. HeroQuest is very combat focused. A lot of the games that I play are combat focused, but it always feels like there's so much combat. Like, there's too much and it's boring, and we're constantly fighting, and it's a slog to see how far can we go before we lose our last hit point on our last guy. But in HeroQuest, you have a lot of mobility, and that changes a lot. You can move. You can move away. You can position other people. You can straight up block monsters. Well, with your meat shield barbarian, but still, there's so many other games where as soon as you see a monster with the player whose turn it is, they're locked. They are in combat. It is a done deal. You've got pinning. You've got marching order cards where the monster always attacks that same hero. You've got where the hero cannot move because they're in combat. It can be very much a slog. But in HeroQuest, you can move about freely. There's no pinning. There's none. There's no opportunity attacks when you roll away. There is no price to pay, no consequence for just moving around. And that's great. I love that. And it makes it definitely feel like combat is ingrained into the exploration as part of it, rather than a sequence that needs to happen whenever a monster is rendered on the board. Rendered in 3D. So, some thoughts on that. Making the game easier when you've modified it. Give more details about what you did to modify it. Did you give the monsters more hit points, more body points per se, more wounds? Again, talking about every game here. If so, that's, you could start there. You could decrease the amount of body points for the monsters in HeroQuest. The European version's always been interesting to me because everybody just has one. And I'm sure that it can kind of feel like a cakewalk if you're used to the US edition where monsters have multiple hit points. But that's because the EU edition is more about exploration. There's combat, and when there's combat, it's grim because it's like you're pretty much just slaughtering the monsters as you go through. And there's still danger because there's still traps. There's still places where the monsters get attacks on you because it's their turn or because they were wandering monsters you found while searching for treasure. But for the most part, it's very much more focused on how the overall dungeon feels. And we get that in our US edition because we get the same dungeon, the same monsters, the same everything. But we have the slightly different stats on our monsters. So it probably feels like, perhaps to us, it feels a little more in line with other games that we play because a lot of the games, as I mentioned, are so combat heavy. A lot of dungeon crawlers are so combat heavy. Yet it still doesn't feel like too much. I like the exploration aspect very much. I like being cautious and looking for traps, not necessarily having to fight a monster every time it's my turn. So I like that. I'm not complaining at all. But that is the way the game was created to be. That was the intent of it existing. So that's also really cool. I think that's what gives it its flavor. The one that we see wasn't created by somebody in the US using US conventions. I mean, if it was, it might have been a lot more like Monopoly. HeroQuest Monopoly. You've landed on the Barrow of the Witch Lord. It has 3 skull hotels. 25, 50, pay 75 gold to the dwarf. I better stop. That's starting to sound fun. And I hate Monopoly, so I'm moving on. Other ways, consider that when you increase the stats of your monsters, that each stat is its own dimension. It's kind of like having an Excel spreadsheet, right? Or multiplying numbers. But like, try not to visualize it or you might break your brain. If the monster has 5 stats, 5 traits, 5 numbers that can be adjusted, the movement, attack, defend, body, and mind, this is 5 dimensions. If you increase 1, if you double just the BP of that monster, perhaps you're doubling its difficulty because now it actually has 2 hits. If the hero gets 1 hit in, it still has another hit to go. That would be kind of a proper doubling. I know that the numbers don't agree, but if you take all the numbers as individual units and you are considering that you're multiplying all of them by one of the numbers that you're changing, it does double the stats. So that's doubling the difficulty in that context. I've done a lot of research into difficulty of monster skirmish. And a lot of people have created their own stuff. I haven't seen anybody really pay too much attention to it. I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm not like, I figured it out. That's not the case at all. This is just something I wanted to talk about. And I'll talk about this more in detail in another video that's all about skirmish difficulty. But if you've followed my streams at all on Amalgamash, which I won't be talking about this stuff on Amalgamash anymore, so you're not going to miss anything as long as you're subbed here. You know that I've been working on studying the numbers involved in the difficulty of compositions of different or parties of different monster compositions. So when you walk into a room and there's just a goblin, okay, that's your unit of measure so far. If you walk into a room and there's 2 goblins, that's not the difficulty of 2 goblins. We did not double the difficulty. We tripled the difficulty. And the reason that we tripled the difficulty is that both of those goblins are able to attack you. If you kill one, you still have 1 more goblin to attack now who can attack you. So begin to see when I explain all of this in the skirmish difficulty video that adding another monster does not change the difficulty necessarily in a linear fashion. Sometimes it does it in an extrapolative fashion. So, if you have 3 goblins in a room, this is 6 times the amount of difficulty of 1 goblin. If you approach them and if you find them in a corridor, okay, that's a little bit different. Now it's triple the difficulty because the goblins can't all attack you all at once. Only 1 can each turn. If it's your turn, the other goblins can't attack unless you have a really, really evil Zargon who is moving the goblins away between attacks and having the second goblin pass through the other ones and attack. That's definitely possible. But the point is just to illustrate, if you have a room and there's 4 goblins, that's 10 times the difficulty of a room just has 1 goblin. The potential for 10 times the amount of power against you is now there. Because you can only kill 1 per turn. If you do kill them at all. So that bears some consideration. And just as one more example, talking about difficulty, if you increase all of the stats of a monster, Like if you double all of them, you're not doubling the difficulty. You are raising it by a large margin. This new monster you've created has magnitudes of order of a power increase. Think about a TV screen. I know this is a weird thing to bring up, but it's the most readily available thing. Think about resolution on your TV screen or your computer monitor. You might have like a 1920 by 1080. Okay, the 1920 is how many pixels across, the 1080 is how many pixels down. That's 2 dimensions. If you double one of them, that's, it is what it is. You've doubled your resolution along that axis. But if you double both of them, you haven't doubled your resolution. You've quadrupled your resolution. So just think about that. If you double both of those numbers, you end up with a 4K monitor or a 4K TV. And that means your original resolution TV would fit in your new one 4 times, not 2 times. So just something to think about when you're adjusting the difficulty of your monsters. I would go slow. I would definitely take it slow. I would do little things. In my first first campaign with friends in a long time, first campaign with friends in my adult life, I would say, they were getting pretty quickly bored with the monsters. Still liked the game, but they were like just tearing through. And I thought, here's what I'll do. I'll start giving the monsters things, extra little things, but I'll let the heroes do a little bit more too, because they were already capping in ways. They were already just getting stronger, and that was no good because the monsters weren't. So one of the first things I ever did was I gave my goblins daggers to throw. Now each goblin could throw a dagger just once. They had just one little bonus, one combat die attack they could make at the beginning while they were in sight, if the hero hadn't gotten them yet. And goblins can move. They have the feet. So you can have them throw their dagger or attack, melee, and then move. But they can move up to 10 spaces. They can go. So have your goblin race across the board, keep the hero in line of sight, and then throw the dagger. And by doing this with at least each goblin, you've increased the difficulty just a little bit of the cheapest monster on the board, the weakest monster. The goblin, and he's got like one hit, He's going to be able to run up to your hero and hit him one time. But if you actually have an excuse to keep him at a distance and throw that dagger, that's a little more dynamic. And you don't have to give the goblins multiple daggers or crossbows or anything like that. That would, oh, wow, that's an idea. You can just introduce that one thing, and then you can kind of build up from there. It is your game. Do what makes the most sense for your party composition. I agree very much with the top contributing post to that, top contributing answer, I think, whatever Facebook calls them, to that post. They said, the point of HeroQuest is to have fun. And I'm very, very much, you've heard me be vocal about this in my channel comments, in my Discord server, in other people's Discord servers. Yes, people say, remember, you're Zargon, you have the final say. Don't forget, as Zargon, you have also a responsibility. It's not just, I'm Zargon, I'm the rock star. You've got to control the flow of the fun. And that is a very stylized job. You have to make sure that your people at your table are having fun if you want to keep playing with them. If you have the final say, and you're just, meta all the time and trying to kill off all the heroes every turn, that's fine. It doesn't necessarily facilitate a win for you. Zargon doesn't really win. The group wins. Everybody at the table, if the heroes complete the quest, really, because now as Zargon, you get to set up the next quest. You get to delve deeper into your lore. You get to experience all those opportunities for more role play and setting up, and you get more time to play the game because you're not going to play the same quest over and over and over again unless your party is dying, but they're actually really adamant that they're going to finish this quest as it was intended to be played. Maybe you've got a party of ashes and they're all playing the Frozen Horror, the original version. In that situation, you've got a party of heroes who's going to work hard to finish the quest as it was intended to be played. But generally, if your heroes are not having fun, those heroes may choose not to play with you again. And so that's the responsibility that you have. You have the final say, but this final say is mired in responsibility. And that's my spiel on that. Guys, the other thing I wanted to talk about was I wanted to touch on the subject of the exclusive Gen Con dice. By now, you've heard either from Facebook comments or Always Bored, Never Boring put out a video, or perhaps you are in the Avalon Hill Discord or my Discord, always linked in the description below, that these dice that were being handed out at Gen Con for free as a bonus to people who purchased HeroQuest items from the Avalon Hill booth while supplies lasted are actually not exclusive to Gen Con. I've got thoughts about the wording here and about the terminology, and I'm sure somebody is going to crack them knuckles and start basically repeating everything that I'm saying in this. I have a couple people who like to, it doesn't seem like they really watch or listen to the videos. They take key points of information from my devil's advocate and repeat it in the comments below as if in response, when it's like, bro, I said that. What I said was in response to that. Getting too real. Let me talk about these dice. We've got secondhand information. We've got third-hand information. We've got people who posted. We've got people who showed pictures and said, I talked to an Avalon Hill employee and they said X, Y, Z. I've talked to Gen Con staff. They said ABC. The person that I talked to said blah, blah, blah. And then you've got people who are like, well, I saw on Facebook that it said that these were blah, blah, blah. You have a lot of opportunity for telephone. You have a lot of opportunity for things to get lost in translation when you do things that way. If you are wanting the source, even now listening to my podcast, I'm going to lose things in translation. I try really hard to look at context when people say things. I try to quote them verbatim, but then talk about the rules as intended of their language. I try to delve into this stuff, so I try to be as accurate as possible. But there's a lot of folks that don't have the time or the inclination. They're not necessarily able to do that all the time, so they post, they see stuff, and they react to what they see. And these dice that were handed out, there was a lot of misconception that these are the only ones, they're only going to be available here at Gen Con, and we're never going to see them again. And oh no, scalpers are going to sell them. I'll never get one because I never went to Gen Con and I don't want to pay $300 for a set. All right, so let's all calm down. Hopefully you're already calm. I'm just recounting various paraphrased quotes that I've seen. So these dice were handed out. They were in blister packages. They were called the Dread Veil dice. They had a really interesting material pattern in which they were blue, purple, kind of sparkly a little bit, people have reported. I don't know, I've seen pictures, but you know how these kinds of dice can vary from package to package, die to die. They can vary quite a bit just due to the manufacturing process. Dice of this pattern, of this style. We've seen dice like this a lot. We've seen a lot of Dungeons and Dragons sets of dice that have the two colors that mist and swirl within each other. And it's like no two sets of dice are really the same because of how the colors are mixed and how these things are produced at the factory. And that's pretty cool. I do like that. I do like that a lot. And I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to have dice like this because lots of people want new dice. They want multiple sets of dice. They want official variations of HeroQuest dice. And a lot of people have expressed their intent to buy this if it becomes something that's retail. Some people think it's fine that these were, allegedly exclusive because you went to the con to get goodies. You got goodies. You got con goodies. There should be con goodies. There should be stuff at the con that celebrates that you were at the con. Perhaps there could have been a place where you got badges and all of the badges just said, Gen Con 2023. Those aren't going to be available at retail. And you know what? It makes sense. It's fine. It's nice. Gaming stuff, on the other hand, I can see that people might have contention with that. They're dice, so you're already going to have dice. This is like the cosmetic upgrade. It's generally acceptable in video games for there to be cosmetic DLC, even though the cosmetics are considered by some to be, quote, part of the game. It doesn't change the way the game is played or the game mechanics, and you still have an equal shot at everything else in the game. That's free, even if you have the paid thing. So it's not as exploitative as, say, paying for an extra level or paying to power up your character, paying for a weapon. That would be considered the lawful evil of today's video game economics, or one of the lawful evils. For board games, this would translate to the character packs. If you could buy a character pack and then that gave you an unfair advantage, or if the character was, if Avalon Hill decided to release a, this is a terrible example and it's not going to happen. If they decided to sell a single card and it was a mithril broadsword and it allowed you to attack with 5 attack dice and it was usable by anyone, and they sold this, and let's say it came in its own little case or whatever, but it's just a single equipment card, and it's $19.99. And if you buy it, you get the unalienable, unchangeable license to start the game with this sword, regardless of what Zargon says, regardless of what any of the other heroes at your table say. This would be the equivalent of the video game example I've given. It's highly unrealistic, but I point that comparison out that I made up in my head to say having exclusive dice is not the same as that. Having exclusive merch at a con, it depends on what it is. Like if there was a whole new expansion, a whole different new character, and they never put them out at retail. Or God, if they brought the Commander of the Guardian Knights out and they said, oh, we have a second run that we've done, but it's only for Gen Con. I think there's a couple people whose heads would explode. Mine wouldn't, but there'd be a couple, and I would understand why. But what they did was okay. But I think that they saw the commentary about the exclusivity, people immediately blowing up. Some people being pretty rude about it right away. Some people throwing the old, thought you learned your lesson. How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man? Playing that card, and the official response that we have, we can have several official responses because we have the senior product designer in the Discord, various Discords actually, speaking on this subject from time to time if people pester him enough. And we've got screenshots of what he said that get passed around. And the official statement from the member of Avalon Hill, whose word we consider law, is nobody said these were exclusive to Gen Con. Well, I mean, they technically are, and they technically were. By the definition of the word, you could not get them unless you went to Gen Con. And so I think that's, while that's technically incorrect, sorry, Chris, I think that the intent of that statement was to say, nobody said we wouldn't do something more with these. And I think that should have appeased everybody. In my opinion, I think, hey, if this is just a timed exclusive thing, I think that it's fine. I don't really think that they planned on distributing them in larger numbers. I could be wrong. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was just a Gen Con exclusive or intended to be at the beginning, but a lot of people expressed how they wanted these special dice. So I think that the natural response was to say, all right, hold on. Realistically, there's conversations we have to have. We have to get into, with Hasbro, you know, a little bit of analysis. We got to present to them it's profitable and that people want to buy it. And then we could think about doing a release if we can plan things out. Probably won't see that for a while, but it's a possibility now. It's not a no. It's not a no. It's a maybe. It's a maybe. It's not a yes. It's a maybe. So that's pretty cool to see. You love to see it. Avalon Hill might re-release those dice. I want to say though, a lot of people were upset about them, or were just sounding off, and I love that. I love that they're giving good, valid feedback. But man, the dice are kind of ugly. I just explained that there's differences in the manufacturing, or the manufacturing process creates differences in the product themselves, just by virtue of it. But I don't like them. I don't. I would collect them, sure. I'd buy them. I have a collection of HeroQuest, both classic and new. I would add these to my collection, surely, because they bear the official logo. I even collect unofficial HeroQuest stuff. But man, not worth really even getting upset over. The inlays are colored, I believe, a shade of purple that doesn't stand out well against the purple of the dice. Somebody said, and again, this is telephone lost in translation, could be an outright lie. I don't know. I don't trust everything I read on the internet, but I do report on some of it. Somebody said that they talked to a staff member, and the staff member was like, I don't know if they were from Avalon Hill or Gen Con, or they were in the know, or if they were even a staff member. But they said these were rejects from the Frozen Horror run. And yeah, that's possible too. It could have very much been a case of, all right, we're changing the plastics out, we're changing the colors out, we've got to bleed the plastics through. What's in the reservoir was purple or a really dark bluish color with some red mixed in. We got to purge that out. Go ahead and do a couple of cycles to get these made, get all that material out, and then this new material, the Frozen Horror material, will be in there. And we'll make Frozen Horror dice. And they got through their runs, and they ended up with, I don't know, a few hundred. Maybe they're able to make many at a time. And they took the product and they said, hey, yo, Avalon Hill, here's our scrap if you wanted it. And maybe I'm just making this scenario up in my head, guys. It has no credibility. It has no basis in real world other than my experience with some manufacturing techniques at previous jobs I've held. So I'm just envisioning a scenario right now. Avalon Hill looks at the dice that are failed and they're like, you know what? These would be fun to hand out. Maybe we can go ahead and get these inlays painted and hand these out at Gen Con. Just kind of my thoughts. Guys, I think that's time for me, so I appreciate you listening. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. It's been really, really cool, really encouraging to have, and I appreciate you all very much. I'm going to go for now, but please check out the other videos. Make sure you subscribe if you like this content. Like the video as well if you want to. It does help the algorithm or whatever in some way, but who cares about that? Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, have a great rest of your day. Now onward